All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Global Entrepreneur. This is Pablo Mascaretti, and I'm here with Tyler Morton. He's one of my close friends, and today's episode is going to be about how to become more global, especially how to gain globability. The ability to being global. Tyler and I got to know each other once when we were at a restaurant, and I heard him. I think talking to some guys about like languages, and that's how we got to talk to each other, and then we discovered that we had very similar interests when it came to learning languages such as French and Portuguese and Spanish, and just interested in culture. So I'm just pass it on to you, Tyler, so that you can start talking about how we met and sort
Yeah.
of yeah.
So, I have a very big, very profound interest in languages. And, ever since I think maybe sophomore year of high school, I realized that I really like them and I have a very big passion for them. And so I
Mhm.
started learning French first in high school. Took 4 years of French in high school. I did a lot of extra work outside the classroom, watching movies, trying to meet people that spoke the language. And, that kind of just exponentially grew over time. And, I met a lot of Spanish speakers in college and they became really good friends of mine. And I learned Spanish through them as well as I did an overnight camp at a university in Georgia, where I learned Portuguese for 9 hours a day for 3 weeks, and all of that just kind of added up together to where I am now today.
So tell us a little bit more about your background. How did you decide to go into this Portuguese camp in the first place? Because not a lot of people in the U.S. are that interested in sort of like learning a new language, because obviously it's very hard and it's not a very common thing there. But you mentioned that you went to this camp for I think 9 months. And how why how did you get interested in that in the first place?
Yeah, sure. So my family's Portuguese, and no one in my family speaks it, and so that was kind of something I wanted to learn just because it's my heritage, and so I had been taking French for maybe a couple years, 2 or 3 years, and so I had a bit of a background in the Latin languages, and so I was interested in learning others, and so I found this camp that was an intensive language learning camp where it wasn't just Portuguese. It was I think it was at the at the time it was Portuguese, Russian, Chinese, um, French, I believe, and maybe a couple other languages. It wasn't just like local languages. It was a lot of like very important languages because I think it was that way just because it was a government program or it was associated with that. So that's why Chinese and Russian were present there. But the teachers were native speakers. Their English was really good, but like you could tell that they were true speakers, and this was the best of the best teachers for it. And there's two parts actually. I only did the one part, so two parts, 3 weeks each. It was like basically Portuguese one is the first part, and then Portuguese two was the second part. I only decided to do the first part just because it was cheaper. But it was still a really good experience. Started to learn a lot of words, a lot of material, and that was 3 weeks, and it was 9 hours a day. It's basically you're committing your whole time to learning the language, and everything else that you're doing outside the classroom was just because we were still so young, we were still in high school, and so to entertain us, we did extracurricular activities all together with all the different other language groups, and so it was a good experience. It was like basically an overnight camp where you could be very productive with your time while learning a language.
So, how was your time there at the camp? What were your activities, and how did you sort of get to know other people? Did you talk in Portuguese with your classmates, or I think you told me a story about working out in your dorm room and having a lot of fun, and how languages just bring people together. Uh, so, how was your experience with that?
Yeah, so yeah, that is true. The story about working out. That's actually probably another story of how I got into physical fitness. But to focus on languages, my Portuguese group was a very small group, and just because Portuguese isn't as much of a popular demand, especially for that camp. It was more Russian and Chinese. People were more interested in the more exotic languages,
Okay.
um, more difficult languages. So Russian, Chinese, and some of the other languages were more the bigger bulk. But Portuguese, we were a very small group. I think we were about 7, 8, no more than 10. And a lot of us had already taken other languages before. I think most of everyone was taking Spanish in high school. Spanish and Portuguese are already very similar. A lot of the words, a lot of the sounds. So they kind of had a little bit of a step above. I think myself and another student who were taking French. And then another student that was in the group, she actually was Brazilian. She could speak pretty well. She just,
Wow.
lacked the grammar, probably very comparable to what my Spanish is right now, where she spoke very well, but just, the grammar just wasn't there. So,
Gotcha.
yeah, so we all bonded over our interest in languages, and, that just really took off. And, we were very young, we're in high school, so, we had a really good time together.
Super cool. And tell me a little bit more about this. You said you traveled to France for 6 months or for a year for an exchange program. How was that experience? Was it the first time you were traveling abroad from the U.S.?
So it wasn't the first time, but it was the longest time. So in my summer of high school, between freshman year and sophomore year, I did an exchange program to Canada,
Yeah.
uh, in the countryside just outside of the capital, Ottawa.
Cool.
And it was close enough where they did French classes. Like the school was half in French, half in English. So I did get
Okay.
a bit of exposure to the Canadian French, the Quebecois.
So would
Uh,
you say that was kind of like your first exposure to like listening to a different language and sort of just being in an environment where another language is spoken? Or
yeah, I think that was definitely my first major step, if you will, of going outside of my comfort zone, traveling
yeah,
abroad. Let it be, granted it was Canada. A lot of people only regard over the Atlantic Ocean as something more of a challenge. But it
yeah,
still was a different country. Canada still is a different country, different culture. They
that's pretty
have
cool.
they speak French as official language. So it was a
Yep.
very big step. It was only for 10 days, so it was a very good, like, warmer up, if you will. It was still
Gotcha.
I was very young. It was freshman year of high school. So 10 days and then a different country. Made a good friend there. He was into soccer. Like, I'm very into soccer too, and it was a good time.
Damn, it's cool. And all right, so then you say after Canada, you went to France, right?
Yeah. So my so there's probably a big gap in between those two. So the Canadian one was freshman year, sophomore year of high school, and then the French trip was freshman year or sophomore year, junior year of college. So about 4 year difference. So the French one was after, a few years of French. So I had taken French all throughout high school, and I had taken a few courses throughout my college career before that. So my French was probably a B1 maybe at the time, before going to France, and so I did a 2 month exchange program to Paris, France, where we took classes. It wasn't intensive classes. It was just as if it was a class through the university, but it was just taken in Paris. But the really good thing about it was that you were in Paris, so everywhere you were, you're hearing French, and so that's really good for you because when you go to a restaurant, you're hearing words that you would never be able to learn in a classroom style or be able to practice it. You can always simulate in classrooms. Have a student pretend to buy something and the other student be a cashier, but it's never the same. And when you're there speaking the language, hearing all these different accents, because everyone has a unique accent.
Yeah.
Obviously, the region has its general accent, and everyone has their own particular monotone. And so that was really helpful for me because I was able to hear the language day in day out. And I was one of the few, probably in my group, that just kind of like went out and just was talking with people and meeting people and doing all kinds of different things.
Super cool. And how was the impact of just, seeing such a different culture and living in such a different culture? Because, the French culture is very particular. They have like their own sort of like societal rules and the way that they do things daily, and just, their sort of their traditions are very different to those of the U.S. So what was your first sort of like big shock when you got there?
Yeah, I'm definitely in agreement with that. The French culture is very particular. It was a bit of a cultural shock, a bit hard to adapt to. Um, so I think the French culture. At first, it was very hard. Being honest, it was very hard to adapt to, just because all the aspects about it. I think the very first analysis was, it's a very small thing, but they said that you need to say hello and how are you to someone. I think in the American culture, if you go into a restaurant or a business and you're looking to do something, I think we're normally accustomed to just like getting straight to business, saying, hey, do you guys have this part? Do you guys have this? Blah blah blah. We don't really say, hey, how's it going? How are you doing? We kind of skip the formalities and we just go straight to
Gotcha.
business.
Okay.
In France, and I think a lot of the rest of the world, you need to be a little bit more polite. You need to say, "Hey, how are you? How's it going? Very well, thank you." And so I actually experienced that. Like I think my very first couple of days there, I went into a phone place to buy a SIM card, and I just went up to the guy and said, "Hey, do you guys have this SIM card or have this phone or something like that?" And he said, "Bonjour." I said, "Oh, sorry, bonjour, comment ça va?" And so I had to kind of just recalibrate my mind to start addressing people a little bit more formally and saying, "Hi, how are you?" Instead of just getting through the business, which I was more accustomed to in the American culture.
And then when you got there, did you try speaking in French all the time, or would you use a little bit of English? And how did people there take that? Were they sort of rejecting you because you were speaking in French with an accent, or were they friendly? Like how's that?
Yeah, so I think everyone knows that the French culture, especially the French language, the French people are very proud of that. And so, if you don't speak very well, you're going to get a little, narrowed eyes at you. So I think my accent, I always really practice my accent in French. I maybe not have spoken at a very high level, but my accent for whatever I said was, you know, I pronounced words properly. I spoke as well as I could with what I did know, pronouncing it right. So, I didn't have trouble with that necessarily. Speaking the language, because I would always, put myself out there to speak the language. The only time I ever spoke English was with my classmates. If we, going to class from class, because we did a lot of stuff together, we did a lot of exploring together, and so we would be speaking English with each other. But whenever I was out, speaking with someone from Paris or from France in general, I would always speak in French.
That's super cool. So would you say that trying to force yourself to learn how to pronounce really well that helps in integrating yourself to this new culture or this new place you're visiting?
Yeah, I definitely did have to force myself to speak the language, and it definitely helped me because I think that's how you learn a language is if you have to force yourself to think every day, constantly in that language in order to make your mind learn the and adapt to the language. So I definitely did force myself to speak it constantly. I was always
Right.
speaking it whenever I could, and I was always trying to speak it. But yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. And then have you seen this problem in the U.S. where there's a lot of international students that come to the U.S. and sometimes their English is not very good, and they actually try to communicate with Americans or with locals, and I think or for what I've seen, there's kind of like a disconnect there because they can't really express themselves very well, and that creates kind of like this awkward situation where the sort of the international students really want to socialize with the Americans or the locals, and but Americans want to do that too, but it's just a little bit uncomfortable because the conversation can't really flow very well. I've seen this with usually people that come from Asian countries because their languages are just very different in structure and and the grammar and the way it works, and even the characters. So what do you think about sort of international students coming to the U.S. And their ability to learn this English and sort of how would you say what would you say are good things for them to do?
So I'll start at the beginning. So actually, I had a conversation about kind of this with a friend of ours, and we were talking about how in a lot of other countries, if you don't speak the language very well, they're very friendly. They're very open to helping you out. They won't really give you a look. They'll really try to help you get through what you're trying to express.
Yeah,
Even if your level's super, super low, super, super high, whatever level, they'll always bear with you and try to help you out. Whereas the contrary, I think in America, I think a lot of people they expect you to speak the language very well. They expect you to speak English at a very high level. And, if you don't speak the language at a very high level, you might get um, not necessarily disrespect, but, just, they won't try to help with you. They won't try to they really help you find those words to really carry the conversation. But that's just, what I found with, a friend of mine when we were talking. It could be very different from what I've seen.
yeah,
Um, but that's just from what I've talked with a friend of mine who's traveled the world a lot. He's lived in many different countries, and I think, and I think he's right. I think, based on his experience, I think what he's seen, I think is very spot on. Um, as far as my advice to people that are coming to the United States with maybe not, native level of English or, C1 level, maybe, lower, I'd say, just find friends. Whatever age you are. Most people I would say are probably going to be fairly young, probably 35 or younger.
yeah,
You'll definitely be able to find friends very easily, and that's how you improve your language skills is socializing with friends and colleagues. And so once you are able to do that, and form a kind of a friendship with someone, they're definitely more than willing to help you improve your language. Where maybe if you make a mistake, they'll be like, "Oh, sorry, no, that's actually not how you say it. You say it kind of like this."
yeah.
Um, and they're very supportive of you in the process of learning that language. So definitely friendship is probably the number one advice I would give to people that are trying to learn a language, especially for the American culture.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. I think, the first thing to me is being upfront about, you being international in a different country and just, telling people like, yes, I'm, an international here and I would like to learn how to pronounce words right, how to learn a language if you could help me out. I think that people are willing to help, and that's not an issue. In my case, I think one thing that really helped was that I had a roommate from New York in during my freshman year in college. So during that entire year, I was able to communicate with a native speaker all the time. It was like when I got into my room, I would just start speaking English, and that really helped me because I had practiced English for like 13 years back home. But it was completely different, talking to a native, just the way the words are pronounced and sort of the expressions um, and that just really helped. So just I think the first advice is being upfront. Second advice would be trying to find a roommate that speaks English really well or speaks the language, and we're going to touch more on that with you shortly. And then I guess the third thing would be also yes, like just like you said, meeting friends. In my case, like meeting you was really helpful to me because you're one of my few American friends, and I guess my pronunciation and sort of the expressions I use have been getting a lot more polished throughout time as we've spent several years in college together, and I think that really helped me improve my English a lot. So yeah, that's fairly good advice. And how about so you mentioned that you got interested in Portuguese because you had family heritage. Sort of, your family immigrated from Portugal to the U.S. And that's how sort of it started sort of like wearing off through the years and through generations, and now your parents don't speak the language, but you were interested in Portuguese. And but I guess I want to know, like, how did you get interested in French? Like, why French and not why any other language? Was that because of Canada? Was that because of any other interest, maybe like sports or music, or why? Yeah, so that's my question.
Yeah, so I think back in high school when so you know, the high school requirement is you have to take 2 years of a language. 4 years is actually, if you want to, it's only 2 years that you have to take a language. You know, I think I chose French not for any particular reason, any influence. I think it was just purely because they only offered three languages. I think they were Spanish, French, and German. Obviously, a lot of people take Spanish because Spanish is a more predominant language in the United States. But so I think I just wanted to be a bit different. I think I wanted to take a different language. Actually, I remember myself saying very vividly that I actually never wanted to learn Spanish just because everyone learned everyone learned Spanish. Like I wanted to just be kind of not. I didn't want to be on the bandwagon almost.
Yeah.
Obviously, I learned Spanish. And I kind of went against that, but but yeah, like at the beginning, I just kind of wanted to learn to be different and learn a language that not a lot of people speak.
Okay, that's super cool. And then, so I know you also like soccer a lot. So, how was your relationship with Portuguese and French with soccer? Like, did that have an influence on learning the languages? Like, did you link those two things, and was that sort of like how it sparked your interest, or do you think it was purely because you were in high school and you just got into it?
So I think with French, like I said, it was kind of just being unique. With Portuguese, it was my slowly, bit by bit, getting interested in languages, and that was kind of the decision to learn Portuguese. Um, with the football aspect, or soccer, um, it wasn't really until actually Spanish. Spanish was like that key in the door to
Oh
unlock the
wow.
between languages and football. So it wasn't until my senior year of high school where I started to learn Spanish on my own because I'm a Real Madrid fan, and so basically what I did was I started watching a lot of the press conferences and from Real Madrid on YouTube. And of course, they're always in Spanish and with the accent particular from Spain. And so what I did was, I watched a lot of the press conferences, a lot of the interviews of the players, and little by little, I was starting to build my comprehension um, of the language. And so Spanish was probably the main catalyst of linking languages with football.
Okay. Yeah, I guess that's really cool. And just to sort of like link up the conversation, I would say, so for what I know, I think so. When we were at Purdue, we used to go to play soccer at the T-Rex. So that's kind of like a soccer, like an indoor soccer field. And I think the cool thing was that we both went there oftentimes during the week, and we would meet people from different countries, from South America and from Europe, but it was mostly Spanish speaking people, right? So I think, I guess that's where both you and I got to meet a lot of people from South America, from everywhere, Colombia, Peru, Argentina, Uruguay, Brazil, and also Latin America, so Mexico and other Central American countries. Um, and sort of to give a little bit of context, that's how we became friends to all the Latinos in at Purdue, and that's how Tyler and I got to know each other through common friends, and that's how we got to know each other. But what's interesting is that when we started spending more time with Tyler, his Spanish was at a very beginner level, but he was very interested in learning more about the language, and just by spending time with us, and trying to force himself to learn Spanish, he started getting better and better. And obviously, just having that sort of like background in Portuguese and French made that transition a lot easier to towards speaking Spanish. So I guess, my question is, how did you feel at first when you were, so I guess the good thing you did was finding friends from South America, right, in the first place, because that's how you were exposed to the language all the time. But my question is, how did you feel at first when you were not very fluent, when you had a hard time speaking Spanish, but you still wanted to learn? Did it help that other people that you wanted to communicate with spoke English? Like, how was that dynamic? Like, what were the dynamics behind it?
Yeah, so I think at the very beginning it was definitely a challenge. It was definitely challenging because you guys were my friends. You guys definitely gave me a lot of definitely joked a lot about it, about my accent
Yeah.
or particular things I said, and so at first it was very difficult, but obviously um, it takes time. Languages take time, especially
Yeah.
depending on yourself too. I myself did a bit of outside studying. I was always watching videos like the press conferences that I was talking about from Real Madrid,
Sure.
watching movies in Spanish, and and actually picked up a few books. So I started learning the language socially, which I personally believe is the best way to learn, is speaking with native people and leaving grammar for later. But at first it was very difficult, and then gradually and gradually I was learning a bit more and a bit more, and connecting the dots between different words and learning kind of the rules as I was going along, and little by little I reached the level I'm at today. So I still have a lot to go, but I still have a very solid level, and definitely having friends that spoke the language and with a very high level of English, even native level of English, was definitely very helpful because when you have someone that speaks both languages, you know, at native level of both languages, they can explain stuff that you can never explain, that you can never learn through a workbook or through the internet or
Yeah.
wherever whatever means of learning it. They can explain it to you because they can think in both different ways. They can think how you can think, kind of, because when you're thinking in different languages, it's not just the way of the culture, but it's the way of thinking in the particular way that you send out sentences. So they can think of in English how you might think of it in Spanish. So they might be able to step out and out of the box and go, "Oh, okay, I see how you're thinking like that." But no, it's actually this way. But so how in English, it's just kind of stuff like that where it just kind of helps you little by little.
Yeah, so I just actually want to like triple down on what you just said, because so this channel is about how to become a global entrepreneur, and part of being an entrepreneur is finding those free resources on how you can not only capitalize on building a company, but also how you can improve yourself. And just I feel like what you just said is very important, because in the U.S. at least, taking a class at a very like private institute takes about like $75 an hour, right? And you're starting from a beginner level all the way through, and that just takes thousands of hours to learn and to master, right? But the fact that you can teach yourself how to learn a language by trial and error, uh, for free, just like meeting people, that's actually something crazy if you think about it. You're literally gaining hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of education for free. And what you just said is very important, that no matter so it doesn't really matter if you go to a very good institute, or if you try to learn from books. The best way to learn is to practice with natives, because especially when they are bilingual at a native level in both languages, they're able to explain things that no one else will be able to, because you have those cultural nuances and that sort of um, those like slang and the expressions that are used in both languages, that perhaps someone who studied the language for a while but didn't live in both countries, it's not. So let's say you have an instructor at an institute who, I don't know, who, let's say, studied English their entire life and then just went to the U.S. for a year. That's still not the same as someone who lived in the U.S. for like 10 years and then lived in South America for another 10 or 20 years, because obviously when someone can sort of master the two languages at the same level, and be able to teach you sort of what's the relationship between those two. That's something really really powerful, and that's what drives your level up by a lot. I think that's the way I see it, at least. And Yeah, so definitely just if you want to learn a new language, the best way to do it is to meet friends and try to learn for free. I know that there's a really cool app I just downloaded. I haven't really used it very much. It's called Ablo, so ABLO. It's a pretty cool app because what you do is like you kind of like travel throughout the world and you meet different people, and then you can like choose in the settings like which language you speak, and then like you would say, okay, I want to learn, let's say like Portuguese. We'll take you to Portuguese speaking countries, and you would talk to natives there, but they would also speak English, so you have the ability to sort of practice those two languages, and you can do it with any language that you want. So that's definitely something really really helpful. But Yeah, and then let's see the yeah, so definitely learning languages for free is something really useful. Now let's talk about how sort of well, I guess just one other comment is I'm interested in the fact that some of the guys from our group sort of started bullying you and joking about your level of the language, and I thought that was stupid because I really recognize your effort, and I knew that as an American trying to learn a completely different language, that's something really hard to do. So I think some of us, in a group of friends, really tried helping you out, like Carlos and me, and so. But would you like to tell the story about like what happened with Carlos and how he translated a message and why you shouldn't rely on your friends all the time?
So, so basically from the beginning, always the the amigos, if you will, were always giving me, making jokes on me. Of course, they're friends. It's always, just take it on the chin, move on. But sometimes it gets frustrating. It's sometimes it's you're struggling to speak the language, and they're just really hammering you. And so you know, last semester, um, I was I had been sending emails a lot to different people to try to network, and these emails were in Spanish, and so I was relying a lot on these friends to kind of critique these emails, because sometimes I make grammar mistakes, and just want to make sure that these emails were expressed perfectly. There wasn't any mistakes, so and so on, and so I wanted to send this quick message to someone via Twitter, and and so I wanted to say the word helpful, uh, you know, and it was kind of a word that I knew the verb ayudar, but I didn't really know how to like kind of critique it and kind of manipulate it to say helpful. So, and I knew that Google Translate wouldn't really be able to. I imagine that Google Translate wouldn't have been able to kind of say it exactly the way I wanted. I was imagining it was going to say it in a different way and kind of get the context of what I was trying to say, but it wouldn't be right. So I sent a quick text to my friend. I was like, "Hey, Carlos, how do you say helpful?" And in helpful, easy, one word, he sent the answer like that, very quick. He didn't take time to think about the answer or anything. So I was like, wow, okay, okay, helpful, boom, boom. He sent me the word rebusio. And so for those who don't know what rebusio means or don't speak the language, that means foreskin. So basically, I wrote the message saying, any help, or, if you could do this for me, this would be so immense, and foreskin. Basically, what I wrote in Spanish.
Wow. What did
On
you get?
Twitter, you
Which
can't.
response did you get?
He never responded, so it's all right.
Well, I mean, of course, right?
I don't
What was
think he
your
ever, I don't think he ever saw it either, so I think it's all right.
Okay,
And
okay.
so,
Yeah.
and on Twitter, you actually can't delete the message, so it's always there. So if he ever does decide to open up his DMs and look at it, it's there. Luckily, it wasn't a person that it was someone that I was trying to network with, so hopefully he can help me get to a level. But it wasn't like someone very, very important, where my whole career is, tarnished. But it was, it was a bit annoying. It was funny.
Yeah,
Definitely couldn't believe that he did it. But a little backstory is that Carlos and I, we joke around a lot,
yeah.
maybe too much at times, and so he, took the opportunity to to get one on me, and he definitely didn't think twice about the circumstances and like why I would be asking about this word. But
Yeah, maybe you were just
it's more
asking to like know how to say it, and he was just joking around, like he didn't know the context behind it. But anyway, I think the important lesson here is that just a very like one word can entirely change the context and the tone of everything that you're saying. So that's why it's very important to sort of like double check what you're saying. Especially if you're posting on social media in a different language. When you're just beginning to learn the language, it's important to like double check in Google and also with friends and more than one person, kind of like to revise what you're writing and what you're posting. And especially if you can't really delete it later, because it can really tarnish your image. So I guess that's sort of where I wanted to get to. So be very careful in how you post things. And I guess, me personally, I have really struggled with this because in a way, I guess you know, I'm like very aggressive when I post messages and especially on LinkedIn, and that's because I want to like hook people into like the projects and the businesses that I'm working on. But sometimes I've gotten like really helpful feedback from you and from other people saying, hey, why don't you like tone it down a little bit? Like I think you're being overly aggressive and be careful, because this is not really sort of conveying the message in the way you want to convey it. So yeah, so definitely, if you're posting on social media, be very careful. Just, talk to people, revise the tone. And because sometimes you're literally just translating from one language to the other, but you
yeah,
don't realize that you can't really contextualize the same message for both languages. So you have to sort of adapt your message to whatever audience you're talking to. And that's just really hard to do because when you're beginning to learn a new language, you don't have that context. You just don't even realize that you're kind of like stepping out of the line. You know what I mean? So yeah, definitely being careful when posting things is definitely important. Um, what else? So I guess now I wanted to ask you about entrepreneurship in general. So um, again, this channel is about becoming a global entrepreneur. And I think a misconception that people have is that, in my opinion, kind of like the perspective in the US is that you're only an entrepreneur when you start new companies. And I think that's wrong. That's not the good perspective to take on it because building a company is usually sort of like the distillation of a bunch of experiences that you live that lead to sort of like an interest in something and that then becomes a business, right? Or for the most part, like the most successful companies that I've studied and the most successful founders that I've talked to have had sort of like these experiences. So I guess, in my opinion, an entrepreneur is formed by gaining experiences and just like doing things out of the comfort zone. And that's sort of the way I see it. And, in this world that's so massive and there's so many people, we're like 8 billion people in the globe. Just being able to learn different languages and being able to communicate to everyone in the world is one of the most important skills you can have as an entrepreneur and as a businessman too. And that's why I sort of want to really focus on languages. But what I want to focus on now is, I feel like me just being involved in entrepreneurship, I could really help you like pursue your interest in soccer and languages. And one thing I really wanted to like highlight was the strategy that we used on LinkedIn to reach out to people, right? And what's important here is that not only we did it in English, which is the language that we both speak, but I also helped you sort of refine this message in Spanish so you can talk to people that are in the environment that you really wanted to. And in my opinion, that's why I consider you an entrepreneur because you had the initiative to not only talk to people from everywhere around the world to pursue your passion, and you actually did like really well. You got like very interesting results, which now we're going to talk about. But also because you've been always in constant motion. You've been always like traveling to different countries and learning from different cultures. And to me, that's really what the essence of an entrepreneur is. and also just using free resources like trying to learn languages from friends and from watching TV shows. That's what really makes people interesting, and not pouring thousands of dollars in education worth nothing, or sort of like saying you're an entrepreneur because you're building a business, but that really doesn't capture the essence of it. So why don't you talk to us a little bit more about the strategy you used on LinkedIn and how it helped you with that, and sort of how you approach different people and why? Can you give us a little bit of context in that?
Yeah, so I think in this day and age, LinkedIn is the best platform for adults looking to get into any kind of career field who are 18 years or older, or even a little bit younger. Um, and so basically, a couple of years ago, I started using LinkedIn to start to contact one of my favorite coaches, Marcelo Bielsa. Um, if you guys don't know who he is, he's a coach, Argentinian coach with a very illustrious career. And right now, he's the coach of the second division uh, team, Leeds United, in the English championship. Um, and so he is very difficult to contact. If you look it up online, he is actually there's a story on the Paraguay national team trying to contact him, and this entity, this very large international, recognized by FIFA team, they struggled to contact him, to get into touch with him to see if he could coach them.
Yep.
So, myself, one person, it was definitely a challenge that I definitely took upon on my shoulder, and I knew it was going to be very difficult, and it was very difficult. But this was my idol in soccer, and I definitely wanted to get to reach out to him to learn from him. So basically, I used any means possible to try to contact him. I was constantly researching different people that that maybe not even directly connected to him, maybe people that were connected to people that knew him, or people that knew someone that knew someone that knew him.
Yeah.
And I started contacting all these different types of people. I sent out hundreds and hundreds of emails, different messages via LinkedIn, via email, etc. And so LinkedIn was probably the best platform because that's where all of these executives and different people in the industry, or people that are connected to them, it's basically their social media for business. And so I used
Yeah.
LinkedIn to get in contact with it. And actually, one of the breakthroughs I had, obviously sending all these messages out, a lot of people don't respond. One of the breakthroughs I did have was contacting the investment firm that owns the soccer club.
Yeah.
I forget the name of it, but I contacted someone that was vice president of the company, or a manager, or someone decently high up within the firm, and I sent them a message and I said, "Hey, I'm looking to get into contact with Marcel Bielsa, and I know you guys are the investment firm that owns Leeds United, and I was wondering if you could pass along my letter to him." And she said, "Of course, I'll get into contact with the group within the firm that deal with Leeds United." So, if you kind of step back and imagine it, I was probably contacting someone that, was probably 5 or 6 links down from Bielsa,
Yeah.
um, uh, but, I contacted them. She said she would pass along the letter. Um, I did eventually get a response from his assistant coach after several months of contacting various people. I did send a physical letter through the mail, sent a letter to the club's address in Yorkshire, England. Um, I'll never know which means of communication was the actual one
It doesn't
that,
matter.
but it
Yeah.
doesn't matter. I
It doesn't
eventually got a
matter.
response from
Yeah.
his coach, and his response said, "Hey, we got your letter. Marcelo, we also got your letter, and he told me to contact you and find out a little bit more about you. How old are you? What do you do? Uh, Basically, my whole trajectory of life. They wanted to know a little bit about that. And so I sent them a letter, and I was hoping to become part of their team. Obviously, they have a very thorough recruitment process to add people to their team, and they told me that they do have something for me to do, and it's not an offer for work. They wanted to be very clear. It's not an offer of work, but it is a learning process that they will send me different activities to do, whether that be various translations for their team, as they're an Argentinian team working in England, so their English level. Some of them do speak a decent level, but none of them speak anywhere near native level. So translations were a very key aspect of the activities, as well as activities which I was more interested in myself, which were related to football. Um, you know, whether that be the intense research of the other players in the other team, the other rival teams. Height, weight, where they're from, language they speak. The very detailed things that I never even imagined was even a thought. And so they sent me those activities. It was mostly translations for me to do, which, of course, my friends that spoke Spanish helped me out a lot immensely with, especially you, Wampa. Um, and so basically, that was my. Basically, I told myself this is my foot in the door. They did tell me that the thorough process of vetting for people to join their team is not even a guarantee at the end of this. So they told me that you have to do this learning process for at least 5 years, and it's not even very um, formal thing. It's very very informal. They send me things by email. I send it back. It's very informal. It's not a registered thing at all. So I said I told myself I would do it. I definitely was, I was reasonable with myself. I knew that this was not anything to pin my hopes on or put all eggs in one basket. That if I do this for 5 years, definitely going to be part of the Bielsa team. And it's not even paid. It's not even registered. I do have it on my resume, but it's not something to put your hopes on. It's just something to do on the side while you work, make a living. Maybe one day you can get a call and say, "Hey, we'd love for you to join our team. We think the work you've done over the years is very good, and we'd love for you to join the team. We have a need." So I've been doing that, for the last I think it's actually been a year, a little over a year now, since I've been doing these activities. There is some highs and lows in terms of like the work that I do. Sometimes I go weeks without anything for them sending me, and sometimes they send me a lot of things at once. So that was my foot in the door with soccer, with Bielsa, who's my idol in soccer, who I definitely want to learn from just because of his philosophy and his passion for football.
Yeah.
But that whole process was down to sheer sending, just sheer will of sending emails and LinkedIn and using those tools and those resources at my disposal.
Hold on, because I want to go back a little bit and talk about two things. First of all, the strategy we use to help you reach out to that people, because I think that's something that's not very common, and a lot of people don't know about that, but it's actually such a powerful tool. Just seeing how really your story makes me very happy because I could help you out, sort of like reach your goals of getting to talk to people that are very high up, and that some I guess like all of our friends said that it was going to be nearly impossible for you to get in contact with someone like Marcelo Bielsa. But I told you, no, obviously it's possible. You just got to try every single resource that's out there, and at some point your message will come across. And I think that in fact happened. Even though anyone, like everyone, thought we were crazy. So kind of like the story there of like how that's entrepreneurship. That's grinding and that's trying to communicate your message and getting to reach to a specific person. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about the strategy that we use, and then I want to transition into how your level in Spanish significantly improved after you were doing these translations, and especially this last semester that we were together for a while, and how by looking at press conferences, your Spanish got to from an intermediate level to a very high up advanced level. So let's go back to LinkedIn strategy. So sort of as a recap, or the background story. and I haven't really talked about flight cards in the channel yet, but I'm just going to give a quick overview. When I started my first company, the way I did it was I wanted to develop a product specifically for airlines, and I enrolled in this entrepreneurship program, and basically what we had to do was just contact a bunch of people, and we actually got international recognition for our process at several business model competitions because with our startup, we sort of used LinkedIn and email and a bunch of tools to talk to the CEOs from all the major airlines in the U.S., such as and in the world actually. So at one point, I talked to the CEOs and vice presidents of American Airlines, Delta, United, Southwest, Lufthansa, Swiss Air, every single airline you could name, and just having a conversation with the CEO was just as simple as sending a message on LinkedIn and connecting with them. And then when I realized this, I was like, wow, holy shit, like this is a very powerful tool. I guess after that, my entire perspective on how to communicate with people drastically changed. And, I just wanted to pass on all this knowledge to you for free. And that's why it's very important to sort of create the space to talk about entrepreneurship and these things, because that's where you learn like the real practical knowledge that really helps. I passed on the strategy to you, and at first you were still a little bit kind of like iffy on whether this was going to work or not. And I told you, no, dude, like listen to me, this really works. I've tried this before. Trust me, you're going to get a response at some point. And then I guess like 2 days later, you got a response back from like someone at Leeds United or one of the major clubs, and you're like, wow, this is insane. Like they actually responded, and that's when you sort of like where I gained credibility in a way, and you started trusting me, and then you started just like mass sending mass emailing and sending messages on LinkedIn to everyone, and that's where you started getting results. So I guess my advice to everyone is if there's someone you want to talk to, no matter if that's like like Steve Jobs or anyone like super famous in the world, or like whoever it is, you can, if you try every single way of communication, LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitter, physical letters. That was something that really surprised me when you said that you send physical letters, because usually that's something that not a lot of people do, and I found it very innovative in a way of kind of like getting the message across, because like very successful people get thousands of emails every single day, and they pretty much just read like 10% of those emails, like the most important ones and the ones that they can trust. But if you get a physical letter, that in a way tells that you really care about the person you're trying to talk to, because in a way you took the time to write the letter yourself. And I think that has very high value compared to sort of like copy pasting a message on LinkedIn and just sending it to everyone. So it's kind of like getting to that broad audience, but then getting very narrow as well. And when it comes to communication, that's something really, really helpful. So yeah, I mean, just as a recap, talk to everyone you can and use LinkedIn because it's a very powerful tool. And right now there's a lot of attention placed in that social network. So if you want to talk to a vice president, the CEO, a very famous entrepreneur or sports person or someone recognized in your field, you have to use LinkedIn and email all the time. Like that's just the way you're going to get that person's attention. And just like you mentioned, it's not going to be easy. Like think about it. Like for you and I to get in contact with the right person we wanted to talk to, it took months, right? It wasn't kind of like a one-day thing. It's just constantly sending emails every single day. And I think that's where people get frustrated and they just quit because they didn't get a response. But it's all about persistence. You just got to keep going, keep pushing, and at one point you're going to get a message. It doesn't matter if you email the person 14,000 times, as long as you're not pestering someone, if you're like actively trying to reach that person, and just, I think it's not only trying to direct messages to that person, but to a group of people surrounding that person. So the important lesson here is like you actually didn't get to talk to Bielsa specifically, but even though you still try to contact him, but you got to talk to his like right hand or his assistant, which is pretty much the same thing, because that's the person who filters the message to that important person you want to talk to. So usually very famous and very important people have sort of like other people that filter those messages to them, because they're so busy that they just can't take all the requests that they get. So, if you're able to spot out that person to talk to who assists that person you want to really talk to. That's helpful. And it's kind of like in business, in a business setting. That's what we talk about. Finding who your customer is. Like really in a company, and especially when you're doing like B2B sales, so business to business, you're not talking to a company. You're talking to a person that will purchase from inside the company. So that's sort of a similar process. What we did was talk to sort of like everyone and then narrow it down by departments and then narrow it down by functions or roles in the company. And that's how we found key stakeholders that we wanted to talk to. So yeah, definitely a lot of like really cool insights here. Let's move on and talk about how when you started doing this task for translating documents, how you really improved your Spanish. And I think I'm going to give a little bit of background story. I'm not really interested in football, but I was really interested in helping you sort of navigate through getting in touch with this person. And that's how when you told me, hey, Juanpa, take a look at these press conferences, I sat down with you and we would watch the press conferences on TV. And that's where, as we both really understand that communication is very important, especially when you're an entrepreneur, you have to convey your message. And this is not just for entrepreneurs, it's for everyone. You really have to be able to sell your message and your vision. When we saw that Marcelo Bielsa was one of the best soccer coaches in the world, and even his assistants were fantastic, and they were having really good results in the world of soccer. But they were still doing press conferences in Spanish, and the guy who was translating for him, and not just one guy, but several guys who tried translating for him, were not translators, were not natives, and really, as we understood both languages, we realized that there was a huge disconnect between what they were trying to say. And in fact, something similar happened to what we were talking about earlier, that it was tarnishing Bielsa's image because, some of the messages wouldn't come across as they should have. And, especially in a world where there's a lot of press, where like, soccer journalists are just, recording everything and putting it out there. It's kind of like, it's a really sad thing that the message couldn't come across as Bielsa probably wanted it. And you can even see his face that he understands that sometimes that message doesn't come across natural, and he gets frustrated even during press conferences. So I guess that's where we spotted the problem. And that's where, we similar to when you're building a business, we spotted out that problem, and we were like, we said like, okay, we got to solve this specific problem for this specific person. So it's trying to find the pain points that your customer has. So applying very similar methods to building a business and entrepreneurship, I sort of like guided you through how to solve that. And that's how you got into those tasks of translating. And what I find really interesting is that when you recognize that was a definite problem, you were like, I have to help this guy sort of solve this issue. So that's when you triple down watching press conferences. I realized that instead of going to class, you would just stay back at your apartment, just like you're literally watching every single press conference you could find. But that's a good thing. In school, people say like, oh no, you have to go to class, whatever. I'm like, no, dude, like he was just doing what he was passionate about. And that was definitely a lot more important than, like studying finance or whatever that you were doing that you were not interested in. Because you were really doing what you liked, and that's where I knew that you were an entrepreneur. You would just leave everything aside and just care about the specific thing you were passionate about. So that was really interesting. And so tell us a little bit more about how that process worked with watching press conferences, and when you decided that soccer was your thing and you really wanted to be able to learn languages to solve that issue of communication. And how that applies to soccer teams being global entities with players from everywhere around the world, and how that is kind of like becoming your path of being a global entrepreneur.
So yeah, I identified. So when I identified that I wanted to become a coach, I identified several key aspects of what makes a really good coach, and languages were not only something very prevalent, but a priority to become a really, really good coach. If you take into account the best coaches in the world, that people that know soccer very little even know their names. People like Jose Mourinho, Pep Guardiola, Jurgen Klopp, all these people, they speak multiple languages. And in the cases of Jose Mourinho and Pep Guardiola, these men, they speak four, five, six languages, and not just at a very low level. They speak at a very, very high level.
Uh,
So I identified languages at a very early start on how important they were to becoming a really good coach. Because soccer is a very global game, and you have players from all around the world, and some of the best players, all the best players in the world, a lot of them don't speak English. A lot of their native languages are Portuguese, Spanish, French, Italian. Some of the core Latin languages are the main soccer players. They speak, and so I identified languages as the kind of one of the key factors to becoming a good coach. And so, with the case of Marcel Bielsa, and once I had got that letter, received the letter, I told them I would love to do this um, opportunity with them. Granted, it wasn't anything special, but it was something to get my foot in the door, let them know my name, something to do on the side. It wouldn't hurt. It doesn't hurt to do it. And
yeah.
so, I really obviously I had lots of ambition to become part of their team ASAP, and I recognized this communication problem as an entry, as a quick way to kind of bypass that 5 years of learning experience that they told me that I had to do. If maybe I identified it as maybe I could kind of jumpstart that and get ahead of that and fill a need if they had a clear need they had. And so I messaged the assistant coach that I'm in constant contact with, and I messaged him saying, I really think that you guys are doing a good job with the translations, but I do feel that the message that Marcel Bielsa is transmitting in Spanish is not being transmitted perfectly in English, or sometimes even wrong.
Yeah.
And I told him that that my Spanish level is not native, but my English level is native, and I do understand Spanish very well, speak it very well, and that I could definitely work with them and become their translator, to help them out to translate these messages and transmit them properly to the press. Because as you mentioned before, the press in football, they love to start rumors and they love to twist words and to start stories where there wasn't any story to begin with. And especially when you have someone misquoting your quotes and what you're saying, that's going to fuel the fire.
Yeah.
So I definitely reached out to them after I think it had been a few months of me doing this learning experience with them. I'd already established a decent reputation with them, almost with my work ethic and what I've been doing, and reach out to them. I actually had before that I had been watching the press conferences, as you said, and actually sending emails of points in the press conference where Bielsa would say something in Spanish and he would say the consequence English, and he would a lot of times mess up the English, and I would send him emails of those instances of where Spanish didn't match up with the English. I would translate.
Parentheses there. Yeah, so that's really important because that's when you're providing value and giving it for free, right? So you're just saying, hey guys, just take it for whatever it is. I don't care if you really want to hire me or whatever, but this is what's wrong. This is the value I'm providing you, and just take it for free. And that's sort of how you begin relationships. Just give away, and then that was really helpful. Yeah. So keep
Yeah,
going.
and so basically, when I had first sent him that formal email, if you want, of me offering myself as a translator for them, I had already got my foot in the door of being a translator by sending these emails to help him out. And he responded very well to them. He would always respond, "Gracias, abrazo," and he responded very well to them. So it was a very easy transition or easy thing to do to suggest to him that I become a translator for them, because I'd already been helping him before. So it was already in the back of his mind that there was a possibility. Of course, I did get a response saying that Bielsa has this strict policy of working with people that he knows, and he doesn't want to work with someone that he doesn't know, whether that be someone that can do the job better compared to someone that he does know. It is actually preferable to him. He would rather someone that he knows better that doesn't do the job as well as someone else that he doesn't know. And so it actually took me by surprise. Of course, Bielsa and I don't know each other, and so he can't just go out on a limb and trust me, and that takes time. And so I think that's part of the 5 year experience that they originally told me at the beginning. And so I took it on the chin. I said, I understand. I understand the want to work with someone that you do know, because you can have a better relationship with them, and I do believe that you can do better work in that instance. So I just kept sending him emails of correcting him and the translations that he did for Bielsa in the press conferences. Kept doing the activities he sent me, and just kept doing it.
That's awesome, dude. Yeah, and then okay, so I guess now the transition is gonna be in the fact that sort of I just want to highlight something that, just like you said, there's a lot of coaches that speak a bunch of languages, and I think you also got interested in this sort of way of becoming a translator, as well as just learning different languages, because there's soccer coaches who are actually very recognized in the field, such as Mourinho, who have very similar backgrounds to that to your background. Just I think you could please, if can you give a little more context about this guy? Because I think one very cool thing is we always say that you must have a hero or an idol to follow, and to be able to truly that can inspire you to follow your passion. And I feel like Mourinho has been sort of that reference to your becoming a translator. So please, can you give a little bit of background about him, and sort of how that influenced you?
Yeah. So my top dream, as we kind of hit on a little bit, is become a soccer coach, and I want to become the best. I don't just want to coach high school or coach lower leagues. I want to become the best of the best.
Yeah.
And I've identified, as I said, languages to become the best translator, but I've also identified the path to becoming a coach as being a translator. And so translator is what Jose Mourinho was when he was first in the door as in a football club in Portugal. He was the translator for an English coach at Porto and Sporting Club Lisbon. And there, I saw the interview of the English coach talking about Jose Mourinho, where he saw Jose Mourinho translating what he was saying. And he thought that Jose Mourinho was not only saying exactly what he was saying, but he was saying
he would understand it.
No, not just that, but Jose Mourinho was transmitting the exact words and information to the players, but also in the exact same manner.
So what I meant was, like, he was not only understanding the languages, but he was understanding the game, right?
Exactly. So, the English coach was taken in awe by this talent, and he actually brought Jose Mourinho to Barcelona as a coach in 1996, back when the original Ronaldo played for Barcelona.
Mm-hmm.
And Jose Mourinho, when he got to Barcelona, he acted in the facet of an assistant coach, but he also still kept his translating job for the coach, as they speak Spanish in Barcelona, and they speak Catalan in the region too. And so Jose Mourinho had to learn Catalan. He already, I think at the time, could speak Spanish, but he had to improve Spanish because it was Spain, and he had to learn Catalan because it was Barcelona. So, that, looking at the history of Jose Mourinho and how the meteoric rise of becoming the best coach in the world, that really touched me on a path that I love, as languages are something I am passionate about. And he took advantage of that. He took advantage of his skills to become the best coach in the world.
Yeah, that's insane. Yeah, and I guess that another one of your sort of like heroes is Marcelo Bielsa, and I think it's very cool because you got to know me, and I'm one of your best friends, and I'm from Argentina, so I could teach you about the culture from back home, and that's how you also understood Bielsa a little bit better, and sort of that led you to exploring more about the Argentinian culture. And why didn't you tell us a little more about where you are now and how you got there?
Yeah, so you know, I identified languages as the key for soccer and for in general, for business in general. Languages are very key. And so the only way to learn a language and the only way to get to a native level is what I want to do is to go to that country to live there. So basically, I am now in Argentina right now. I moved here in Buenos Aires. I live in a barrio called Montserrat. Um, it's a few blocks from basically the Argentinian White House. Um, and so I'm here, and I came here to learn a language at a very very high level. I hope to become native, and I came to take classes. Obviously, the current situation in the world, everything's closed down. We're all in quarantine here. We're actually in total quarantine here in Argentina, kind of similar to that of Italy. But hopefully this will die down soon, and I'll be able to take classes and kind of really immerse myself in the culture. And so basically, Argentina is the first step in many big steps that I'm going to take in learning languages. My plan is to be here for a couple years to become a very very high level speaker of Spanish, and then my plan is to go to a different country to learn a language. Right now, in the moment, probably the easiest next step would probably be Brazil, just because it's right there next door. Um, but also, my plan is to learn all the Latin languages, Portuguese, Spanish, French, and Italian at a very high level, um, and then use those skills, to become a translator or to help myself even to become a really good coach.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And so talk to us a little bit more about what you experienced coming to Argentina. How did that feel? Also, like moving, sort of like how was making the decision of like really traveling to the other end of the continent, just by yourself and doing something completely crazy and just trying to learn the language and how were your first days over there? Did you like it? Did you find like differences with the U.S.? How was your experience?
So I've been here for maybe about 2 weeks now, um, and it's been a good experience. It's definitely a culture shock when you move to a completely different place. I had never been to a Spanish speaking country. I learned Spanish completely through friends that were in the United States. So I never really been in the middle of the Latin American culture. I've never even been to South America.
Yeah.
Um, the only country I had ever been to was Spain, and I was only ever there for not even 2 days. So my experience with Spanish-speaking countries and Argentina was zip. It was nothing. So it was definitely a culture shock when I got here. Definitely knowing you guys, knowing Latin Americans and people from the different countries like Venezuela, Argentina, Brazil, different countries, definitely was a help. My Spanish level was um, a good level to come here with, but definitely living in the country is a different world, it's a different thing. So it was a challenge at first. I'm getting used to it. It's been difficult because of the quarantine. We're all in quarantine here, so I haven't been able to continue that immersion. I do have a roommate from Argentina. I speak Spanish every day with him, and it's a little by little. Of course, right now in the quarantine, with everything being shut down, the progress is going to be stunted at first. But once the quarantine is released, everyone can go back to their normal way of life. I'll be able to resume that progression of learning the language and immersing myself in the culture.
Yeah, that's awesome, dude. And I really feel like once all this chaos is over, you're gonna be able to resume classes and it's going to be back to normal, and you're going to be able to learn a lot. We're just going to have to be patient, and that's why I feel like this is the best time ever to produce content and put your story out there, and just get other people to really learn about other entrepreneurs' experiences. So, Jeff, to wrap it up, what would you say are your top three tips to gaining globability or global ability to become a global person and a global entrepreneur after all of what we have discussed today?
Yeah, so I think you've hit on it a lot throughout this podcast or this video. Languages. Languages are very key, and I've talked about it with you in the past where it's not just simply learning how to say hello in a different language or like saying exactly, exact translations. When you learn a language, you're understanding that culture too, and learning Spanish through you guys and mostly the Argentinian accent, I kind of implemented the Argentinian thinking and Argentinian ways about myself, and not just the accent, not just the language itself. It was thinking in that way, how to think like an Argentinian. And when in business, particularly when you want to establish relationships for better futures and through your business, you know that language is not just a tool to communicate with people, but it's a tool to relate to people. It's a tool
Yep,
to really hook in people to your ideas and to yourself. Definitely, languages and understanding culture are definitely number one priority.
okay.
Um, for following up on that, I think to be more global and to have a better entrepreneurial idea about yourself is challenging yourself. Like
Yeah,
like I've done myself. I took all the money I had in my savings account since I was a young kid, and I came here. I do have a degree. It's going to be so that's going to facilitate getting a job easier to supporting myself. But I do have all my money to last a bit, so I can have that time to find a job and support myself. So challenging yourself to do new things, to either travel or live in a different country, like I've just done, starting a business, doing a startup. There's a wide range of things that you can do to challenge yourself. Even little things, working out. Working
absolutely.
out is something that we didn't talk about, but that both you and I are very passionate about, and we definitely identified that as something very important.
Yeah,
Even,
that's definitely something we should touch on in later episodes, like how like balancing a workout and healthy diet really helps accomplishing goals, and we're probably going to talk about that later. All right, so keep going. So number three.
yeah. So, and then number three is probably even related to working out. It's probably just having a balanced life. If you want to become the best the best businessman, you have to start with yourself. And that includes taking care of yourself, not eating junk food, taking care of yourself health wise, working out, and because once you yourself are feeling confident and you yourself are on a cloud of feeling great, that transmits into other things that you do in life. If you yourself are
Absolutely.
not feeling the best, you're not going to be able to do these great. You're not going to be able to complete these challenges. Not going to be able to take them on even to begin with. So, you know, and just think about it as an example for when you're sick. When you have a flu or something, you don't want to do anything. You just want to stay in bed and recover and kind of transmit that same idea to not being the best you. If you're not the best you, you're not going to want to do anything.
Yeah.
You're going to feel that you can't do it. You're going to feel that it's too much of a challenge, and
Yeah.
you'll be able to complete it. So starting with yourself, the seed. You're the seed for the business and the startup that you want to become in an entrepreneurial aspect.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also like to add to that, it's the fact that getting out of the comfort zone and also having a balanced life that comes with traveling. Because if people are just working all the time, you're not having a balanced life. It's very important to sort of like sever your comfort zone and travel abroad and see other cultures and see other patterns and just kind of like break the pattern of the everyday life. And that I think adds balance to your life because it recalibrates your perspective. On many things. So yeah, just as sort of like a recap, number one thing is learn languages because that leads to understanding cultures as well. Number two is like step out of your comfort zone all the time. And then number three is maintain a balanced life. So those are the three key aspects to gaining global ability and to becoming a global person and a global entrepreneur. So, thank you very much, Tyler, for today's podcast. That was super cool. So for all of you guys who are following my channel, please subscribe. Please, post your comments down below in the YouTube channel and, stay tuned to next episodes. All right. See you, Tyler. Thanks, man. Bye.
See you guys.